Hi, so I'm Terry Markham. I'm the executive director of Uprising, a nonprofit based in Wyoming. And we are running a social media campaign series for National Human Trafficking Prevention and Awareness Month. And it's called It's All Connected. And the idea behind It's All Connected is that we wanted to explore some different issues that aren't trafficking, but that are related to trafficking and that affect trafficking. So today we are here with Connie Rose, and we're going to be interviewing her, and we're going to be talking about the topic of sexual abuse by a family member. So thank you, Connie, for being here. And I want to start right off the bat with bringing up what we're really talking about right now and today is incest. And as I started doing a lot of research on my own about incest and trafficking, one thing that I noticed is that there seems to be a lot of sort of shame and stigma with the word incest. I mean, even mockery. I'm from the South and I've heard jokes about, your cousins and this and that. And so, as a survivor, can you kind of give us some insight as to like use of the word incest versus saying abuse by a family member and what you think about that?
Well, first, let me just say it really depends on who the audience is. I mean, that's a big part. So I want to clear that up. I choose to use the word incest more than abuse by a family member because we have to make a paradigm change. We have to make a shift in conversation. And that shift in conversation is to use the actual word incest, which, as we know, does mean sexual abuse by a family member and or someone that is has befriended the family. And but with that, again, if the only way to move past certain stigma is to have like these very in-depth, true conversations of a subject matter. And this particular subject matter that we're talking about today, incest.
Awesome. Well, thank you for clarifying that. It's okay then at this interview I might use them sort of interchangeably. Is that comfortable? Make you
That's
comfortable in that?
that's fine. That's absolutely.
Perfect. All right. Well, I just want to start then with having you share just for a minute a little bit about your story and why I have you on here today to talk about this topic.
Okay. Well, this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart for several reasons, but the most important reason is because I am a survivor. And so I am a survivor of over 14 years of incest, along with domestic violence. And then in with that, of course, there's pornography that happens and exploitation. And then later on, as when I became a teenager, um, then I started to be trafficked. And so imagine all those years of having to have sex with someone that's your father, that's a family member. And folks have said to me, well, why didn't you just stop it? Or why didn't you just go tell? Well, I did, just like so many other survivors out there went to tell. But it doesn't always mean just because you tell something's going to happen. And so this is part of my passion, my mission, my why is to have these really difficult conversations around the shame and the blame and the guilt that so many individuals are walking around with. And then here's the other thing about uh, why, for me, incest is because there are so many individuals that won't talk about it because it is their family and they
Mhm.
want to protect their family. But where was their family when it was happening?
That makes sense. So, for you, for your story, when did your abuse actually start? And then at what point do you think you realized that what was happening was not normal and was wrong?
So my abuse started at 2. And now some folks will say, how do you remember you were 2 years old? And I will share with you, I mean, it took a lot. It took a lot of therapy. Why does this number two like just always show up in my life? What did it mean? I went to, oh, it meant that I was in second grade, but no, I was 2 years old. And what really solidified that for me was having a conversation with my older brother. And having this conversation with my older brother, it was a very tough conversation because he started the conversation. He really couldn't get the words out, but he went into the 6-year-old little boy's voice, so I knew something was wrong. And he said to me, sis, because he had just heard me speak at an event like 2 weeks before. He said, sis, there's the two again, right? He goes, sis, you know what you talked about? That happened to me. And I said, what? And then when he described a shower scene and very vividly described a shower scene. Well, it was the same exact shower scene that I would dream about, I could see. It was like when he described it, I was there. And of course, I still had to sit with that a little bit because I wasn't quite sure. But then again, through therapy and just really sitting with it and journaling with it, we were able to really pinpoint it down that yes, I was 2 years old when my abuse started. And then as far as the actual sexual abuse itself is concerned, so that continued. I mean, it really continued all the way until I got married at 19 years old. But it stopped to a certain extent just before my 16th birthday, and here's why. Because then is when I went from being his play toy to being other people's play toys.
Mm, I see. So at that point, did you realize that this was wrong, or that not something that every kid maybe goes through in their family? Or did you, I guess I'm curious to find out if at some point along your childhood, if you just thought this is normal, this is what happens in a family, and when.
There were times that I would question it. I would say, because because I'm Greek and Italian, and so
Mhm.
anyone that's listening that's Greek and Italian, please do not take this offensively. So I'm Greek and Italian. I was raised Catholic and Greek Orthodox, and my father would say to me, "This is our culture. Our culture is such that the father teaches the daughter, the mother teaches the son, and then our entire family was doing it. So all my cousins, like everyone, aunts, everyone was doing this. And I would question back, then why is it a secret?
Mhm.
Like, why can't I go talk to my brother about this? I was very close to my cousins. Why is this a secret? But the other part of it is that I would witness him doing this to other people, to other young girls. And so things started clicking for me. But here I am. I'm this young child. It was basically like riding a bicycle. I mean, this is something that happened over and over. It was very confused about love, right? Because it was, I love you, had sex with me. I love you, had sex with me. So very confused about love. But when it really, the light bulb really, really went off is when I started dating my love, because we're back together after 40 years of being apart. But we started dating and, kissing, and my body started reacting. And I was like, whoa, what's going on with my body? And then, of course, I shared it with him and said, this is what's happened. And that's the first time I told. But that's when I really realized that what was going on was wrong, but didn't mean I could stop it. It
Mhm.
just meant now there was even more guilt and more shame and more blame on myself.
That's that's actually the next thing that I wanted to talk to you about, because in general, this does carry a lot of those guilt and shame, and it's something that's just not talked about really often publicly, at least not in conversations that I've been having. Even in the field of trafficking, I feel like we're starting to talk about it more, but it's still not this huge topic that we're talking about. And I'm curious why you think that is, why it's such a taboo thing to talk about.
Because it happens. I mean, let's talk about the numbers for sexual abuse first. So the numbers are 1 in 3 girls are going to be sexually abused before their 18th birthday, and 1 in 6 boys. Okay, That's a lot of children that are getting abused. And then let's even break it down even further. So if we have 1 in 3 little girls that are being sexually abused before their 18th birthday, who's doing it? It is not necessarily that stranger. And I don't want to ever take away from that either, because I know there'll be people that are listening that that's what their story is, right? That's what happened to them. But what we know is that it's primarily a family member. And
Mhm.
so therefore, then that falls into the category of incest. And people just don't want to have that conversation, because here's what it does. It skeletons in the closet. You mean I have to address the skeletons in the closet? You mean I have to talk about why I don't want to be around grandpa or Uncle Ted or Aunt Sally, or, your brother, your sister, whoever it might have been? Now you have to like start explaining why, when you stay kind of away, why you act differently. I mean, it just brings up so much emotion within the individual, but then also extend it back out to the family. And here's the other part of it. This is what I found personally for my own self, and probably the most meaningful is, if I tell, or if I share with others outside of my family, then will I still be part of the family? What will happen to me?
Mhm. Well, and so for you, obviously, you share your story publicly. And
Yes.
so I assume that your family knows. What was that like?
Hmm. It was tough. It was very tough. I mean, I will share with you that the first time I ever told my mom was when I was 15, because of the whole thing with my boyfriend. We kind of put a plan together, and he's like, "You need to go in and tell her," and I did. And we went through the whole of her yelling and screaming and all that stuff. But she did nothing. She really believed in her own mind that if she just told him to stop, he would. And of course, that's not how it works. A lot of it had to do with my own childhood abuse, not sexual abuse, but severe domestic violence as a child. So not wanting to go down that road, living in the bubble, you know, um, so to speak. And repeat the rest of the question.
Yeah, I just wanted to know how that was for you with
To tell,
everyone
to tell
finding
my
out.
family. Yes. So
Because,
she was the first person that I told.
mhm,
Okay, and then I actually started speaking publicly. But the next person that I actually told was a boyfriend later, much later on. And that's because my father tried to kill himself, and I was living with this guy. And then I found a group to go to and talk about what was going on. And then the next person that I had a very in-depth conversation with is my kid's father, so my husband at the time, and had a very robust conversation about it, which he was very uncomfortable with. And then the next time that I had a conversation was, as my children were growing up. My son was very young. There was a case in California with daycare centers. All these things happened at once. My father was arrested for sexually abusing his stepdaughters, and I made a decision that this was the time for me, even though I had a young child, this was the time for me to go out and start sharing and talk. And this is night in the 80s, to go out and start sharing about incest and childhood sexual abuse, and about the shame and the blame and the guilt and the dirty little secret and the whispers, and all of that. The hardest folks for me to tell, were my children, and I told them.
mhm,
um, and I told them because I felt that they needed to know. It wasn't about to be a shock syndrome or anything. It was to become an educational moment for my children. But then they also needed to know, they knew I had a dad. They knew that he was alive. But why were they never allowed to see him? Why did I not ever talk about him? Why did I not go see him? Why did I only talk about him if I was out speaking about incest? And so sitting down with my children, very age appropriately, and then, through the years, the conversations became more robust, but sharing it with them.
wow. I imagine it's something that's never easy and never going to be super easy to share. And when people are finding out, especially a family member, um, I'm not sure about the statistics on it, but I've met other survivors of incest. And I know that even as grown adults who sometimes speak publicly about it, some of them still have never actually reported that family member.
Mhm.
And it's just something where they're there, they're not really a part of their lives, but
Right,
they still feel like they have such a strong bond and that they truly love that person to the point that they still don't want them to get in trouble for what they did.
right.
What are
And
your thoughts on
it's interesting what you said because they still love that person,
that? Mhm.
because you do. Because I mean, imagine if you can, just imagine if you can, that it is someone that's a family member, someone that tells you that they love you, someone that you want them to love you, because we all want to be loved, right? You want them to love you, so then you have that confusion, and it's what you know. You might not like it. It's horrific. It's a nightmare. But what would it be like if you left?
Mhm.
I mean, what would it have been like if I ran away at 5 years old? Or I actually did, but I didn't get very far. But what if I did, but what if I completed it? What if I stayed away? Where was I going to go at 5 years old? Where was I going to go at 10 years old? Well, what would have really happened to me? Would it have been any different? Well, in a sense, yeah. Maybe some of my survivors ran away at 12 and 13 years old and then, got into the world of prostitution and trafficking and all that.
Yeah, it's kind of a risk whether you stay or you go. I
Right.
just it's hard to almost wrap your mind around the fact that you can still really love someone who did that to you, but we see that over and over in sexual abuse and domestic violence and all sorts of different things where that you still really truly love that person and you don't want them to get in trouble. And so I just know that it's not uncommon for me to hear that this person is still out there, free, part of the family. I very commonly hear what you just said about maybe it's something where your own children, they don't know that grandparent because you're not going to expose them to it, but
Right.
it's someone who's still there. So
Right.
that's really interesting. I'm curious to hear a little bit more now, um, tying this into human trafficking, of when you sort of turn that corner from just that sexual abuse into now this has become a trafficking situation. What did that look like in your situation?
Well, so let's talk first about the whole grooming process.
Mhm.
So whether or not, because not every incest survivor ended up being trafficked, but there was a grooming process that was going on for them basically, in a sense, to buy into this was what's going to happen. Even when you pushed it away and fought it, at some point you didn't have a choice but to give in. Okay. So there's a certain grooming process that's going on. Well, little did I know that all the things that my parents were doing for me, we weren't wealthy, but we lived in a middle class family. I mean, in the suburbs in Tampa on the water. Parents worked two jobs to give us, extracurricular activities. And so little did I know that, my brownies and my Girl Scouts, and I was a dancer and I modeled and I was in beauty pageants, that for him, I won't say this about my mom. For him, it was grooming. For him, it was also his way to start marketing me. So he had planned many years um, before he started trafficking me. He had already put the plan. He had already planted the seeds, and the seeds that he planted were people that I knew, men that I knew, that I grew up with, that I thought, in a sense, were like my uncles because that's how much I saw them and all of that. And so, because of modeling and being in pageants, um, I remember I was on the runway. I made all my own clothes because we didn't have the money to do it all. So I would make all my own clothes. And I can remember, this is just before my 16th birthday, being on the runway and looking around and these men staring at me in such a way that I can remember vividly looking down between my legs thinking that I forgot to put my slip on. Even
Mhm.
though my dress was lined, I forgot to put my slip on and thinking, the lights, and they could see through, because why else would they be staring at me? Um, and afterwards, I went to my mom and I said, Mom, these men are staring at me, like it was really creepy. And she's like, I don't know, honey. And so then about 2 weeks later, I had really started getting the courage of killing him. I had made a decision that I'm going to be rolling into my 16th birthday. I can't do this anymore. I can't live three lives because it's the life at home, right? The life at church and the life at school,
Mm-hmm.
because the trafficking hadn't started yet. And so I started hiding a knife underneath my bed and just kept waiting and waiting. And whatever reason it was on this particular day, that I don't remember, but I remember him coming and walking into my room and pulling the knife out and putting it to his back. And I said to him, "No more. Like, you will not ever touch me again." And he laughed in my face. So now imagine getting this courage to stand up to someone that's been abusing you your entire life, and not just sexual, but physically, mentally. Um, there was drugs and alcoholism and pornography. And when he laughed in my face and he said, "I've been waiting for this day." And then he said, "We have been waiting for this day." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "This is how it's going to be from now on." And then he shared with me what he heard me saying to my mom. He said, "Those men that you're talking about were there to look at you, and you are going to be a prostitute." And I can remember thinking, prostitute, prostitute, prostitute. No, I'm like a 15-year-old, soon to be 16-year-old Christian girl walking up, living in this house. Like, no, because what I knew was what I saw in the movies, just like what a lot of people know about human trafficking, right?
Yeah.
So what did I see in the movies? Well, it was usually older women, right? Very hard looking, blonde hair. And I'm like, that's not me. Like, how can a kid, a teenager? And I just went, maybe then he'll stop having sex with me. I don't really know what it means to be a prostitute. I don't know like all the whole ins and outs and like whatever. But if I don't have to have sex with him, okay. And I said, okay. And still not knowing what I was getting myself into. I really thought that I could buy myself a few weeks and then try to figure out, what to do and how to get out of there and all of that. And then my life just took a whole nother turn.
Wow. So when were you finally able to escape the abuse altogether?
Well, altogether, it was many, many years later. But I got married at 19 years old. And, back in the 70s, getting married at 19 years old was not a big deal. Like today, some folks will be like, really? Come on, go to college, do this, whatever. But I wasn't allowed to go to college. And I can share that at some other point. Um, but I met a really, really nice guy. I will never take away, because what I knew love was, what did I really know? But I'm never going to take away that I was not in love with him, right? But I met a really nice guy, and we got married, like, I don't know, 2 years, not quite 2 years after we started dating. And that was the only way that I was getting out, because I wasn't allowed to go to college. I wasn't allowed to move out like with one of my girlfriends and live with her. I wasn't allowed to do any of those things. According to my father, I will just leave at home. And so I got married. And even when I got married, walking me down the aisle, I got married at a very large Catholic cathedral in Tampa. That's where I live, in Tampa, Florida. Standing at the back of the church with my father, he looked at me and he said, "Look outside." So I did. He goes, "The limo's waiting for us." And I'm thinking, of course it is. It's waiting, for my husband and I to go off to the reception. Like, what are you talking about? And he said, "You don't have to do this." And I'm looking at him and I'm looking at all the people in the church and I'm thinking, what do you mean I don't have to do this? And he said, "You and I can leave right now and we can go somewhere out of the country and live as husband and wife." And I will tell you, I have no idea how I got down that aisle, but I know that I was poof, and I was down that aisle because I knew that was a death sentence for me.
Mm-hmm.
Not getting married, but not getting married and being with him was a death sentence. So I got out then, but he still had a hold on me. So even though I didn't, years later didn't communicate with him and all that, there was still this hold because he was still out there. And until he died, November 2nd, 2008, which is my birthday, until he died, was I really free, because I didn't have to I didn't have to look over my shoulder. My kids didn't have to look over their shoulders anymore.
Wow, that's very impactful story. I've heard of I know a couple of other survivors who um the perpetrator has died, and they said that is the only time where I truly felt that sense of freedom. I'm curious though, um, is there anything oh, I just don't even know where how to even word this question in my head because it sort of just came into my head as you were talking. But um, almost, is there any advice or anything that you were able to do in that time when your father was still alive, that you had sort of gotten out of that, that helped you to sort of work through everything? Something that someone who might be in a similar situation would be able to do if they're trying to overcome what's happened in their past.
Well, let me just start with my children first.
Okay.
Telling my children and letting them know why mommy is the way mommy is. And I was not a helicopter mom by any means, but I was very much on top of my children. Like I just had ground rules for them, and as
Mhm.
long as they followed the ground rules, things were great. And they needed to know why. Why did I have these ground rules? Why did I have to like meet parents before they went, out with friends and spending the night at someone's house and all those kinds of things. But with that, I was very fortunate because I started seeking out groups. And so what I looked for, because I didn't know how to seek out a therapist per se, okay, because nobody in my family was helping me. And so when my father tried to kill himself, I was already out of the household. Actually, I was already divorced. I got divorced after 3.5 years. And so when he tried to kill himself, I can remember going to the hospital and sitting down with the therapist there, and the therapist saying to me, I want you to understand this whole thing about incest, and that society has said that incest is wrong, and that your father is so good that it's possible that you are the one that has the problem. And I remember leaving there devastated, like devastated, thinking, what did I do? Like, what could I do as a 2-year-old child? How could I be the one to be the blame, right? And so what I did is I found an incredible group. It was all women, that was all incest survivors. And that was my lead into how do you go get therapy? How do you really start talking about it? But more importantly, because nobody was out publicly talking about it that I knew of. Um, it was, oh, there's other people like me.
Yeah.
Even though the stories are not exactly the same, because there's no way, even for my brother and I, we grew up in the same household. We experienced so many of the same things, but our stories are very, very different. Part of it is just who we are and how we're made up. But find someone to talk to. And here's the other thing. In today's world, it's a little bit different in that, just keep going and talking and telling someone, and until someone finally says they're going to do something. Because you might have to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people, and I know that's tough to hear because you wanted that one magical number, that one magical person. But just keep talking until someone says, let me walk alongside of you and help you and find someone for you to talk to.
That makes sense. Wow. Do you think that there's anything, either in the human trafficking movement or just as individuals, that can be done to help sort of push the needle so that, sort of that shame and the trauma of it all
Mm.
isn't such a barrier to preventing self-identification and disclosures? I mean, what
You mean
I'm
we
curious.
see self-identification and disclosure as being a human trafficking victim?
Or just a victim of incest, even, really. Um,
Well, people aren't so here's interesting. Words are very interesting, right? So someone will say, I'm a survivor of childhood abuse.
mhm,
They might not say sexual abuse, but that's what it was, right? It's very rare that you hear someone say, I'm a survivor of incest.
mhm,
So first you'll hear that. It is the same thing in the world of trafficking, right? It takes so much for someone to come forward and say, I was a victim and now I'm a survivor of trafficking. And since my expertise is sex trafficking, what they will say is, oh, I had to have sex with people so that I could have groceries or to have a roof over my head, or, my boyfriend, which happened to be their pimp. But my boyfriend had me go have sex with people so that we could have money, whether it was for drugs or car payment or whatever it might be, but not, oh, you mean I'm a victim or I'm a survivor of sex trafficking. So
Absolutely.
what it is about getting to the root.
Yep.
For me, when I work with my survivors, it's about having conversations of, let's have a conversation about what happened. And I just use 3 to 5 years old. What happened before your 5th birthday? And see
Yep.
what they say. Because I'm not going to, open up with which we know is that 70 to 92% of sex trafficking survivors are sexually abused as a young child. We know that, but I'm not going to open with someone with that, because what am I going to do? Put them on the defense.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why when you opened it up and you said, well, I want to start with the word incest, but you're going to interchange it with childhood sexual abuse, because childhood sexual abuse is more palatable
Mm-hmm.
than the word incest.
Absolutely. So, I mean, in your opinion, then, would you say it's just all about having these conversations? We just need to keep plugging forward with having these types of conversations and bringing it to the forefront of people's minds so it's not this taboo thing in the back.
Well, it is. It's about having the very difficult conversations, you
Mhm.
know, because the last thing that anyone wants to do, and I've worked with so many survivors of this has happened, they didn't want to have the conversations. Um, and then it happened to their own children with the same person.
Mm,
So imagine what that must be like. So
yeah,
having, just opening up and having these difficult conversations. And for so many, the first place is to hear something like this, right? And then and they can always seek me out too. Excuse me, I have to cough 1 second. Sorry. Um, but having these conversations, they can reach out to me and have this conversation if that helps just to get them started. But that secret's going to make you sick. That's
mhm.
the other thing about it, because you're going to keep stuffing it and stuffing it. And one day, at some point, it's going to erupt. And when that volcano erupts, what is that going to look like?
Well, this leads us right into my last question for you. Not even really a question, um, but tell us about what you're doing now. Tell us about the organization you founded and how people can reach out to you and find you and where they can follow you and all the good stuff.
All right. So I have an organization. It's called Victims, VICTIMS, then the number two, and then Survivors with an S at the end, US. And we have been around, we started about 2008, but really came about in 2010. And it really started the conversation. It was about incest. It was about incest, childhood abuse. And that was our focus. And then one day, because I also had a radio show during this time in the very beginning, and one day someone said, "Why don't you do something around Super Bowl?" And I had already started learning about human trafficking, and I said, "Okay, like what?" And then I started researching about Super Bowl, and there's something that's called the ugly underbelly of Super Bowl. And as I was reading about it, and I'm like, oh my God, that is me. Because it talked about young girls and party favors. And that's my story. I never walked the street. I mean, I might have gotten dropped off downtown or on the causeway or something, but someone was already waiting for me. So I don't know what it's like to walk the street, but it was like party favors. I know that because I was a party favor a lot. And then that really turned the tide, because then I had to sit and I had to look at, oh, now what do I do with this? you know I was like, okay, well, here I am over on this side. I knew that I was a survivor of incest, of childhood sexual abuse, and all other kinds of abuses, right? I knew that. Now I got to add this one on top of it too. What does that really look like? And it just opened my heart and my why and my passion even more, because I was like, okay, if there's so many other survivors like me, that are incest survivors, how many trafficking survivors are out there that are also incest survivors? And we have
Wow.
to do something about it. So
So
it's
this is
interesting.
now over 10 years old now, Victims to Survivors.
It is. It is. We've kind of, ebbed and flowed. I will, be honest with you. We kind of ebbed and flowed because if I went to go work for a nonprofit, I would have to shut it down. It was just kind of, the competition thing, right? Not to make anyone bad, but it just is what it is. And then 3 years ago, we brought it back up again, and we are who we are today. Rolling out a campaign at the end of the month, Get Help, Get Out. Um, and a lot of the work that we do is really around prevention, around awareness, a lot of training, and a lot of very robust conversations with survivors. I run mentoring groups for survivors that are in programs and for survivor leaders. And it's about having that brave space, that brave place to be able to really talk. Because they're talking to someone, again, my story is not their story,
Yep.
but we walked it.
Wow.
So walking it out together.
That's awesome. So everyone can find you. You're on the social media, Facebook, and
Yes.
all the things. We can look you up.
Absolutely. Facebook's probably the best.
Yep.
Facebook is the best. Our website is being redone. So they're working on that now, actually, for our campaign. So they've kind of taken it down. It's under construction. So they're doing that. But that's exactly, you can find us at Victim to Survivors US.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
And really, really, really thank you for what you do and for what you share, because I completely agree that these conversations need to happen. It's the only way sometimes that a survivor might realize that they're not the only one that's
Right.
out there. There's other people out there. So I just really thank you for sharing with us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.